this week, as we're doing our spiritual adventure together, we're talking this week about overcoming obstacles. How do we overcome the obstacles? Because once you and I decide that we're going to change, we are inevitably going to run into obstacles. How many of you found that already? In the areas of change that you're trying to pursue, you're finding that you're hitting a wall, okay? Sometimes literally you might hit a wall, but certainly metaphorically we find ourselves hitting walls. Okay, now I'm trying to be real transparent with you here in the process of this, because I've already told you that I'm trying to lose weight. Don't I look thinner? Well, whether I look it or not, I am. That's the good news. Remember me telling you last Sunday I was stuck, right? I was stuck, and I kept going to the club, and I kept working out, and I kept eating stuff, and you know, and yeah. I got on the scale Monday morning, and wham! I broke the threshold. And this week, I have continued to drop pounds. Now, we're talking one at a time, right? Okay, but how many of you know that the onesies are pretty good when you're losing, when it's going down? That's a good thing, okay? We hit obstacles. We hit obstacles in our lives. Now, I'm talking about weight. You might be talking about having a consistent devotional life. Someone else may be talking about the repair of a broken relationship of some sort. It might be a parent-child relationship. It might be a marriage relationship. It might be another relationship. But we're talking about change at every level as it comes into play in our lives. We are inevitably going to meet obstacles of resistance. Does anyone like to watch Olympic track and field?
Yes.
Like to watch that? One of the things that has always been an intriguing race to me is the steeplechase. Yeah, you don't see a whole lot of it because it's about a 3,000-meter race, and all they do is just run this circle. Have you ever noticed the long-distance races? They show you the beginning, and they say, we'll get back to them in a minute. And about 5 hours later, they come back, and these guys are still running toward the finish line, right? Yeah. Well, they do that with the steeplechase. Matter of fact, I found out something interesting. They call it the steeplechase because in the early days in England, when they were running it, they would start in one town and go to the next town. And the only thing that they could see from one town to the next was the steeple. And that's how they knew that they were headed the right direction. So they were running to the steeple of the next church. And of course, it was just the open terrain, and they were running over whatever got in their way. Well, the Olympic steeplechase is a little different. They have, for the 3,000 meters that it runs, they have 28 hurdles that have to be jumped, and they have 7 of them that are water jumps. Have you ever noticed them jumping over the water?
Yes.
They always land with one foot in the water. Don't you know that that's awful to run the rest of the race with your foot wet? I hate my feet being wet in my shoes. Does anybody else identify with that? Here's the point of all of this. Okay, it does have a point. And that's this. Their race really is symbolic of what life is about for us. See, their hurdles, their obstacles are installed artificially so that it can be something like what the old steeplechases were that actually ran over open land. And so it wouldn't be uncommon for them to find the little low stone walls that they had in England that used to separate people's property one from another. You've seen those?
Yes.
And they would have to get over those. That was part of the race. Or run through a stream, or whatever the obstacles were, that was part of getting from the point of beginning to the point of the end. There were obstacles that were involved. And the same thing is true for you and I as we are going through the change that we are talking about. Now, back to the video just for a second. We don't have to watch it, but just to reference it. This guy was legitimately trying to change and trying to keep a positive attitude and trying to approach the things that he had been working on or that those near him had been working on. He was really trying to stay positive, wasn't he? Okay, and trying to find ways to connect what his experience was with reality and how he can grow from it. And you may be at a place this morning where you've hit an obstacle. Maybe like the guy in the song, you've got somebody that leaves stuff all over your car, okay, and there's a breakdown in your relationship because of what they do that you don't like. Maybe more than leaving stuff in your car. Maybe spending more money than is in the checking account, or whatever the example might be, okay? And you've hit a wall. And you're about at a place where you're ready to say, you know what? This change really isn't worth it. It's really not worth it. And maybe I'll just, you know, what I had wasn't so bad after all. Matter of fact, that's one of the really interesting things when you read the story of Israel as they were coming from Egypt to the promised land. They got out in the wilderness and they didn't have enough water and they didn't have enough food. Now, mind you, they've been enslaved for over 400 years. They've been making bricks by hand for a long time, a big part of that 400 years. And when they got out in the wilderness and they didn't have water and food, they said, you know, really, as I remember, Egypt wasn't that bad after all. And sometimes we get to that same place where we find God moving in us, stirring us to change to something new in our lives, trusting Him in a new and a fresh way, and then we hit the obstacle.
Yeah.
We hit the obstacle. And the temptation for us is to say, well, you know, the way I was before really wasn't that bad. I really wasn't doing too bad in my life, and we're willing to go back. And so let's talk for a little while this morning about the obstacles that we're going to encounter when we move through the changes that God wants us to make. And I want you to open your Bibles with me to the book of Acts, chapter 16. If you've studied the book of Acts very much, you're going to all automatically know where we're going. This is from the life of the Apostle Paul. 16th chapter, and we're going to begin reading at the 16th verse. Now let me set this up for you. Paul and his co-worker Silas were on their way to do a second missionary trip. They had one trip, they came back to the place that they had originally, that they'd started from, and it was time for them to go continue the missionary work that God had called them to. And so they decided they were going to leave, and they had a little bit of a challenge trying to figure out where to go. They started off in a couple of directions, and each time as they started, it seemed like the Holy Spirit just said, no, that's not what I want you to do. And they were really trying to be sensitive to the plan of God in their lives, and they were listening for what God wanted them to do, the change, if you will, that He wanted to make. They were going one direction, and God said, no, not there. And then they tried to go another direction, and God said, no, not there. And then one night while Paul was sleeping, he had a dream. And he saw a vision of a person from what we would call today Greece. And Paul heard the message in that said, come over here and help us. And from that, he understood that God was sending them to a new place. As a matter of fact, each one of us seated here this morning needs to be thankful that Paul and Silas went to that place, because it opened up the gospel to Western Europe, where your and my, many of us, great, however many greats we have to go back, grandparents were exposed to the gospel. Okay? So this is a significant event for many of us, those of us that have a Western European background. For us, this is a significant event because it opened the door for our ancestors to hear the gospel. Okay? Now, what would you think, how do you think Paul and Silas felt when they left to go on this trip? When God has given us direction. Have you ever had God do that in your life? Where you had this clear sense that God has spoken. Yes. And there is a purpose. And you launch out with that purpose. Amen. How do you think Paul and Silas felt? Think they were excited? Yes. I think they were. I think they launched with a sense of expectation that God was going to do some incredible stuff. Yes. Because He told us where to go. I want you to see what happens. Verse 16. They're in Philippi. Once when we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. She followed Paul and the rest of us shouting, "These men are the servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved." She kept this up for many days. Can I just pause something here? There's a real oddity going on here, isn't there? Here's a girl who is known to have an evil spirit, who does fortune telling by this evil spirit, but she's walking along behind Paul and Silas and saying, "Hey everybody, you need to listen to these guys because they're men of God." We got a little conflict going on here, don't we? Okay? And finally, Paul turns to her. Let's read what he says. She kept this up, verse 18, she kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed that he turned around and said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." And that moment, the spirit left her. Amen. Now, you'd think at that point everything would kind of take off. Yeah. Because this resistant spirit was no longer around. Yes. Let's read on. When her owners realized that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews and are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice." The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they were severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he received these orders, he put them in the inner cell, fastened their feet in the stocks. Let's stop there for now. So much for doing great and mighty things for God. Right? It's hard to do great and mighty things for God from a prison cell, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well, or at least we think.
No.
That's common. That's the conventional wisdom, correct? I want to come back to our discussion about change for this reason. Because most of the time when we hit obstacles in the process of change, it surprises us, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, when you've made up your mind, you're going to move forward, I'm going to be a new person, and you get smacked right in the face with an obstacle.
Yes.
And doesn't it seem to kind of be surprising and come out of left field?
Yes.
Okay, all four of us agree. Anybody else find agreement with that?
Yes.
Okay? Here's what I want you to see with me this morning. When you and I decide that we're going to change, obstacles are the byproduct of our deciding to change. Obstacles are a byproduct of our decision to change. Okay? What do I mean by that? Well, let's think of it in these terms. Imagine Carpenter Road is a one-way street going roughly to the south. and you're traveling on that street going with the flow of traffic, and you decide to change direction on the same street. And now all of a sudden you're meeting obstacles, aren't you? You've heard the story about the lady that called her husband who was driving home from work. And she said, honey, be careful on the road. I just heard there's a crazy man that's on the freeway going the wrong way. And he said, there's more than one crazy man on the freeway.
Yes.
He was the crazy guy. Sherry and I were in San Francisco about 3, maybe 4 weeks ago. Had gone to a Giants game. Game's over, we get in the car, we're making our quick exit out of the city. And I see the sign, Bay Bridge this way. I missed that one. But I thought there was another one just a couple of blocks down. I was wrong. First time, new experience. I drive on a little bit further, and I'm still looking for a place to get over, and there is no place. The next thing I know, I'm looking at Market Street. I didn't know they were changing Market Street. I thought, okay, Market Street, big street, okay, I ought to be able to find some way to get back there. No. Every left-hand turn possibility on Market Street had been blocked. So I keep driving, and I keep driving, and I keep driving, and I think, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll make 4 right-hand turns, come back across myself, and go this way. And the block that I chose to do that was also blocked, so I couldn't turn to the right. All I could do was go down the street. Okay? Everywhere I turned, there was an obstacle. Okay? Everywhere I turned. And there are times we find ourselves in that kind of thing, and it is a byproduct of the choices that you and I made. For this reason, when we decide we're going to do something differently in our lives, we start erecting boundaries. Now, I mean in a healthy way. I don't mean in a legalistic, restrictive way. I mean boundaries that are healthy. I'm not eating what I used to eat. Okay? I am exercising and setting myself on a schedule to do that. There are things that I'm trying to do in order to be faithful to this goal of losing some weight. Okay? Some of you may have changed your values with regard to your finances because you're wanting to get your finances under control. And you're wanting to manage that in a better way. And so you've decided, we're not going to spend money for these things. Or we're going to spend X number of dollars each month for us to go out and enjoy meals out, or whatever your other entertainment, go to the movies, or whatever it is that you enjoy to do. You're setting parameters for yourself. Okay? Now see, here's what happens. I'll just use this as an example. You decide that you're going to spend X number of dollars for eating out in a given month. And you come home on a Friday evening, and it's been a long week, and your wife works, and both of you are tired, and the last thing you want to do is cook dinner.
Yes.
And you look at your budget and you realize, but we've spent all of our money for eating out. So what do we do? That's an obstacle. Okay? It could be a marital obstacle. If it's not handled like it should be, okay? There could be a breakdown in a relationship, okay? Am I making sense to you this morning?
Yes.
Okay? And so what you and I need to understand is this, that when we decide that we are going to change, you have already set yourself up for meeting obstacles.
Yeah.
Right.
And the question then comes to us, what are we going to do when the obstacles arise? And how are you and I going to address the obstacles that come to our lives? In Paul and Silas' situation, their change was that they came to introduce the gospel to a place that it was totally foreign. It was unknown to the people of Macedonia, or what we would call today Greece. It was unknown to them. And so they went into a place where they knew, if you will, they were swimming upstream. They were swimming against the current. That was their issue. Your issue is something perhaps completely different. Here's another reason that we find ourselves coming into obstacles or conflicts. The changes that we are making are often dramatic changes. They are not just adjustments, but in many cases they are life-altering decisions that we've made. There are decisions that come to us. I know that I'm overweight. I know I need to lose weight. I want to be around for my granddaughter. I want to see her graduate from college. I want to be able to maybe be a part of her wedding day if that day does come. I want to be a part of that. Okay? Well, that means I got to be better at how I manage my body. Okay? And so the decisions that we make and the changes that we're looking at are dramatic and drastic, and we can't just toss them off flippantly. For some of us, the choices that we're making are going to be whether or not we live not just into old age, but whether or not we live to somehow get toward old age. Because if we don't, then there's going to be issues that come into play. So we have dramatic changes that we're dealing with, and that puts us in some very serious decision-making process. Our author, if you've been reading the book Change Before You Have To with us, our author makes a very powerful statement that I want to quote to you this morning, and I think you'll find it on the next behind me. And he says this: our resolve to continue moving toward change is equal to our clarity about the need to change. If you and I really understand how deeply and desperately we need to change, we will not let any obstacle stand in our way. If we truly understand with clarity the desperate need to change, I tried to give you a little equation here. Our resolve to change has to be equal to the clarity of our understanding that change is absolutely essential in our lives. That's a powerful quote for us. That one could go up on your refrigerator as a point of encouragement to you. When we see the necessity of change, we are more motivated to keep reaching. I was thinking about it in light of the steeplechase runners, knowing that they're just doing this to maybe get a gold medal. And maybe there's some financial stability that would come with that as well. But when I think of what their motivations might be, and for those of us who are doing things that are going to perhaps change the trajectory of our lives and the lives of our families for generations, when we're thinking about making those kinds of changes, then we do become motivated. Then we do realize that there's more at work here than just some little ditty that I'm going to do for a while and then go on down the road. This whole idea of there not being enough clarity of understanding is why many of us don't change until we have to.
Yes. Amen.
And the tragedy is sometimes we're too late.
Amen. Hallelujah.
I think many of you that were in the church at the time know that about 4 or 5 years ago, I had a blood clot in my left leg. And I threw part of that blood clot into my right lung. It was a little shaky. I was a little shaky when I went on the internet and saw that 30% of those are fatal first time. And I thought, well, Jesus, thank you. Thank you that it wasn't fatal for me. But it became necessary for me to do something about that and to get the treatment and what was needed in order to keep that from happening again. When I think of how quickly that happened, I was taking a shower and boom, all of a sudden I couldn't breathe. Couldn't breathe well. How many folks have that happen with a heart attack or with an aneurysm or with some other kind of thing that it's over and done with before you realize it.
Yeah.
And too many of us wait until we have to change. And the real roll of the dice is this. Sometimes those who wait that long don't get to. Okay, and that can happen not just in a health kind of way. It can happen in a relationship where you keep thinking to yourself, well, I need to do something, I need to do something, I need to do something. And then one day, the person that you're in the relationship with sits you down at the table and says, my bags are packed, I'm leaving tonight. It is too late. At that point, it's too late. And you might be able to pursue counseling and you might be able to reestablish the relationship. But how much easier is it to work before than it is to work after?
Amen.
Okay? So, the clarity of our understanding moves us. Our author suggests that there are 5 responses to obstacles, and I just want to give them to you. I'm just going to quickly read them to you, and then we'll move on to the conclusion of my message. First thing he says is resist the comfort of old habits. Most of us, when we hit an obstacle, it's easier for us to go back to an old habit. It's more comfortable. And because see, here's the deal. When you're going through change, when you're working hard to change, you're a little bit on edge emotionally. Are you not? Okay, you're on top of your stuff and you're watching for it, and it's easy for you to become irritated easily. Okay? Okay, and when we are irritated easily, what do we look for? A place of comfort. A place where we can be easy. Okay? And there are more examples of that than I could have time to mention to you this morning. It happens in all kinds of ways. So, first point, resist the temptation to go back to your old habits and the comfort that they bring. Second thing, recognize your lack of information. I shared with the folks that were here Wednesday night. I went to a new doctor for the first time on Monday of last week. And he told me some things that I could do dietary-wise that were a little bit different from what I had been doing. And I thought, well, dude, I'm already being kind of successful here. You know? And as I'm driving home, I remembered a line that I read out of the book. How many of you, myself included, have dismissed the advice of an expert in the last 30 days? Someone who knows a whole lot more than you do about what it is that you're trying to get through, who is saying to you, you really do need to do this. Okay? And we dismiss it because we have advanced knowledge. My tongue was firmly planted in my cheek. But are we not all guilty of that? Absolutely we are. Absolutely we are. Okay? So, let's not allow ourselves to do that. Recognize that you need to get more information. The third thing, reconsider your friendships. He spends a long time on this chapter. It's a whole chapter. Each of these little points I'm making are whole chapters in his book. He spends a lot of time talking about friendships. And he makes some very strong points. And let me just encapsulate them this way. He said, if your friends are not willing to embrace your changes. Now, I'm not talking about changes going the wrong way. I'm talking about changes going the right way. Okay? He said, if your friends are not ready to embrace your changes, you need to get some new friends. Now, I don't know how to be more kind and gentle about that. That's the truth. Okay? Because bad character corrupts good character every day of the week. Okay? And so if there's something that's going on in your life that's an obstacle, and that obstacle is your friends, and your friends won't, I'm not saying just throw them under the bus immediately. But as you sit down and say, look guys, these are things I feel like I need to do. These are changes I need to bring in my life. Okay? And I need you to help me. I need you to encourage me in this process. And they are not willing to partner with you in that. Then you need to think very carefully about the relationships that you have and how you're going to, because again, the choice, how clearly do you understand the need of change? How clearly? Okay, enough said about that. Number 4, ignore the urge to give up. Ignore the urge to give up. We all have it. When I was in junior high school, I was unceremoniously introduced to long-distance running. The 600-yard run. How many of you guys are my age remember the 600-yard run that was part of the physical fitness testing? That we had to do it, okay? And the first time I did it, I thought I was going to die. I had never run that far at one time, and I was one of the slowest guys in the class. You know, I'm really a fast runner. I just run too long in one place.
Bless him, Lord.
Yeah. I thought my lungs were going to explode. But I couldn't stop. Number 1, the coach wouldn't let me. Number 2, all my buddies were waiting for me to finish. And you know that no self-respecting 7th grader with hormones raging is going to let his masculinity be questioned in any way, shape, or form. And so what do? You gut it out. And that's what I'm suggesting you do with your change.
Right.
Gut out the obstacles. It may not be pretty. It may not be something that you would desire. But the 5th one is why you do all these other things that we're talking about. And it's keep in mind the end. Keep in mind the end of what your change is going to bring to you. Keep in mind the health that you're going to have to your body, to your relationship, to your bank account, to your relationship with God. Keep those things in mind. See, I envision myself standing up in front of you with a 38-inch waist. That was what it was when I was born. I was a big baby. Okay, I was a big baby. That is a part. I'm sorry, I don't mean if that sounds vain, I don't mean it to sound vain. But there is a certain health that goes along with that. It isn't just the small waist. It's the health that accompanies it. It's the fact that I will know that I have passed through some thresholds and have gotten to a place where I'm strong. See, I want to see some of you step out into places of ministry that God has opened up for you.
Come on.
Places of ministry that God has uniquely gifted you to serve in. And for whatever reason, no guilt intended here, for whatever reason, you haven't gotten there yet.
Yes. Right.
But there's a place for you. A place of fulfillment, a place of satisfaction, a place of completeness like you've never known before when you choose to take that step into what God has in store for you. As you listen to the change that God is working in your life and you refuse to be overcome and you have in mind. You know, this whole idea of keeping the end in sight is so fundamental to everything that we are as Christians. It is something that Jesus appeals to over and over and over again in the Scriptures, talking about us remaining faithful to the faith.
Yeah.
He talks about keeping the end in sight.
Right.
Hebrews chapter 12, I think it is, says, seeing that we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, all the people who have finished their race. Seeing that we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let's run the race with patience.
Right, amen.
So that we may gain the victor's crown. Not the ivy that was given to the Greek winner, but the crown of life that becomes our gift because we have been faithful. See, ultimately, that's what this change is all about. It's letting God make us the people that He has envisioned from the very beginning that we can be. I want to go back to Paul and Silas before we close, because we left them in the jail cell. Pick up at verse 25 with me, will you? About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. Would you think about that with me for a minute? They are in a jail cell and everybody's standing there looking at them. And they are singing hymns. We might add out loud. They were being heard. And the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once, all the prison doors flew open and everyone's chains came loose. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself. We're all here." The jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" Wow!
Hallelujah.
What did Paul come there for?
Exactly.
To share the gospel.
Amen.
But he did it through the obstacle of the prison cell. A couple of things I want you to see with me. Okay, the obstacle that Paul was up against is one that God intervened on his behalf and did what Paul and Silas could not do. Here is the power of God to work in our lives to help us overcome the obstacles. Okay? Now, again, that becomes different in each case. For some folks, there's a miraculous healing that takes place. Maybe somebody that's wrestled with alcohol or smoking for years, and there's just this healing that takes place, and they don't want it anymore. It's over. It's done. It's a miracle of God.
Yes, right.
For some, there are others that God comes in and works and does things in a different way. It isn't miraculous. It's the day-by-day overcoming that God allows them the grace and the strength to do. And I would simply ask you, which is the greater demonstration of God's power? You could make a very strong argument for the person that gets strength to go day by day for the rest of their lives. That's a longer period of time for God's power to be at work in their lives. What I want you to see is God came into Paul and Silas' situation and was their help in dealing with the obstacle. There's not an obstacle that any one of us face. As a matter of fact, Gary mentioned our Bible readings. The last couple of days, the New Testament reading has been in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And I really hadn't planned, I read it this morning and I thought, oh gee, that would go really well with my message. And I really hadn't planned to add it, but it's very appropriate to add right now. Beginning at verse 1. Now I do not want you to be ignorant of this fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea, meaning they went through the Red Sea with Moses. They were all baptized into Moses, into the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with them. See, folks, they had all these miraculous experiences. But the miraculous experiences didn't change their lives. They didn't change their lives. Okay? And God was not pleased with them because faith didn't rise up in their hearts. Verse 6. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test Christ as some of them did and were killed by snakes, the plague of snakes that came. And do not grumble as some of them did and were killed by the destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. Now here's what I wanted to get to, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will provide a way out so that you can endure it. When you and I hit the obstacle, see, every one of the things that he just talked about here were obstacles for the people of Israel. There were tests for them, things that were in their way to determine, are you going to trust God or are you not going to trust God? And God kept showing up with miracle after miracle after miracle, and every time another obstacle would hit, they would say, gee, I sure wish we were in Egypt. And so finally God said, okay, that's enough. That's enough. I'm going to raise up a new generation.
Yes.
But Paul says here, these things happened and were written down for you and I, so that when we hit the obstacles, we will know that there is a God who is with us, that will not let us face an obstacle that is bigger than us to be able to overcome, but He will provide a way of escape that we will be able to deal with the obstacle.
Amen.
Here's the deal. You and I have to stay in the jail cell long enough for Him to deliver us.
Right.
Amen.
You and I have to stay in the jail cell long enough for the earthquake to happen and God's power to come into our situation to help us. And if you're like me, most of us are too quick to jump. We call the ACLU. Okay, or we call our attorney, or we call somebody else. And we come break me out of this place. Okay? And what God says is, no, guys, I want you to trust me. I will help you.
Yes.
If you will hold steady and you'll let me. Would you bow your head?